And we are back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Derek Haven, Steve Ballsterian, as always, here from PatsFans.com. Please do subscribe to us on our Patriots 4th and 2 YouTube channels. And also, please be sure to like, share, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Keeps us high on those podcast rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about not only the newest member incoming or soon to be coming to the Team Hall of Fame. Also, we're going to be talking about Steve's mock draft, that we have coming up. And then we are also going to continue our series on discussing the front seven prospects for this year's draft class. But before we do anything, as always, we always start the show like this. Steve, how you doing, man?
It's been a crazy day.
Yeah.
It's been just one of those days where it was so hectic. But you know what? Excuse me. It's all good in the hood. And, the Patriots have a new member of the Team Hall of Fame.
Yep.
There was more talk of the draft, and Elliot Wolf made the rounds a little bit.
Yep.
With the media. And it's going to be really interesting. How everything plays out. I did like Vrabel's comment. They were asking him about, what's going to be at number 4. And he said, tell me who's at 1, 2, and 3, and I'll tell you who's at 4.
I'll tell you, I know we talked about this earlier, and not everything we have on today's show, Steve and I have already talked about, which usually is the case. But I'll tell you, I love Vrabel's sass with his responses. It's fun. It's like he wakes up every day and just has a little extra pepper on his eggs. You know what I mean? I just like his approach to things. And even sitting down at the table for the initial meetings down there, and he's like, I had to fly all the way to Florida just to see you guys again. and it's fun, but look, honestly, I think he understands that, the team's in a certain stage, but I think he also understands that they are in a position to not only acquire a couple more good players high up in the draft, but also compete too. I think that's kind of been lost in the mix a little bit, because I think some people think they're farther away than they are. I'm not saying they're going to be in the AFC Championship next year or whatever, but I also think they have a chance to be better than what they are, and I think he believes it too. And I think his swagger, his charisma, not only helps kind of lead the room, but I also kind of builds confidence for the fan base too, which I think is incredibly important to ownership, which should not be undervalued.
Absolutely. And, we assumed, and we talked about this last week, but again, it's worth mentioning. We assumed that, he might have a little pull, getting defensive players to come to the Patriots, because that was his, that's his specialty. But the fact that Stephon Diggs last week said the big reason that he came was Mike Vrabel, I was a little surprised by that, and happily surprised by that, actually, because that speaks volumes when an offensive player, wants to come play for a defensive coach. And, depending on how things go this year, that might open up a lot more, players coming here, because God knows they've tried the last few years to give away a bunch of money and nobody was taking it.
Well, I think Gerard Mayo. Let me back up, and I'll try to be kind of quick about this, but I think like someone like Bill Belichick commands the room because he's just such a great leader of men, and obviously the accomplishments and the achievements, it's easy to go ahead and kind of fall behind someone like that because he's so structured and so kind of, in rhythm. I think Gerard Mayo, a lot of us, including myself, I don't want to speak for everybody, but like for myself, I thought that Gerard would be a little bit better at communicating because he was a player and then he was transitioning to coaching. But I think the good thing about Vrabel is that he has had some success as a coach. He had some success as a player. And there are some guys that gravitate towards him. He also has a non-BS way of kind of communicating with guys. And yeah, he likes to kind of bust some balls a bit, but maybe more than a bit. But he also cares about his players, and I think they respect that. He treats them like men and human beings on and off the field. So, I think that this is not where I thought we were going to start the show, but it's fine to mention. I think that part of, even when like Robert Spillane and some of those free agents were coming on the first day, the fact that they had like the families around and Vrabel was hanging out with the kids, I think he wanted them to feel like, I know you guys have life outside of football, but we know we have a job to do. We're paid well to do it. This is what we want to do. But I also want to make you feel like your kids are welcome, your families are welcome, and this is what we want to do. And I think that was I'm saying this without obviously being in the room. I think there was a little bit of an imbalance of that last year where it was hard of kind of having that I'm a friend, I'm a boss kind of line with Mayo and some of the people on the coaching staff. I think there was an issue with that. I think Vrabel has already toed that line a little bit. I'm sure he has things he would take back, which he'll probably implore on this tenure as a head coach. But I do think that's something to keep in mind, because I do think that's important too. And look, I mean, two veterans who played in the league for different teams that played for Mike specifically, Taylor Lewan and Will Compton. They have a podcast called Bussing with the Boys, which is pretty good. They rave about his coaching style and the way he connects with players. And you saw it with Stephon Diggs, who, no former affiliation, but just felt like it's someone he wants to kind of run through a wall with. And what can he bring out of? And he brings a little bit of swagger and a little bit of, again, charisma is a word I really like to use with him, because I think he has a way about him of kind of like rallying the troops. And let's be honest, the Patriots have been, as Robert Kraft himself said at the meetings down in the Southeast, been a little bit of a difficult mess the last couple of years, and this is a guy who I think can go ahead and corral the troops. And we've seen nothing but that so far in his early start to his coaching career here.
Absolutely, and I agree with all of that. And with that, let's get back on topic here.
Yes, thank you.
Because the Patriots have a new member of the team's Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and so Robert Kraft mentioned that Bill Parcells is going to be inducted into the Team Hall of Fame, and you and I had a conversation about it earlier, because I was a very young kid when he was part of the Patriots. I've seen the documentaries, I've listened to the interviews, I've done my research, so I understand kind of. I totally am on board with it. I'll actually just share my part first, and it's going to take about 10 seconds. I think it's definitely overdue. It continues to be an issue where I feel like they're going to have a logjam in the Team Hall of Fame, because there's been so many great people in the last quarter century. But you obviously have a better knowledge of him and what it means, and I know you have a couple things to share about it. So why don't you go ahead and give your take on Parcells being mentioned as the next member to wear a red jacket?
Well, I'll tell you, when he came along, how you feel about Mike Vrabel, taking over the team. That's how it felt with Parcells. They're alike in a lot of ways. They're hard coaches, but they know how to motivate people.
Yep.
Parcells was a total smartass with the media, and he loved it. He used to love tweaking their nose a little bit here and there. And, but the media always ate it up. I mean,
but they're kind of some of those guys that are like, you can't decide if you want to punch him in the face or run through a wall for him.
Frequently both at the same time.
Maybe you do. Maybe you do.
Yeah. So, that's the kind of attitude he brought. Plus, he had won a couple of Super Bowls with the Giants, right? So he had a track record. People knew what a good coach he is. And he was, a really good evaluator of talent. And I loved Parcells when he came to New England. I mean, I used to just make it a point of watching every press conference, all of that because of his personality and the fact that he turned the team around. The first year they started off really poorly, like they had been, but at the end, you could see the team starting to turn things around.
Mm-hmm.
And they only finished 5-11 that year, but they won 4 games late in the year, and you felt the team, taking that step forward. They had drafted Drew Bledsoe. He was learning on the job, and Parcells was a tough coach for Bledsoe, because I remember all of the, you'd always see the clips of them, and he was hard on him, but I think it made him a better player. And that second year, they started off slow again, but they won a bunch of games down the stretch, and they made the playoffs. I mean, in 2 years, they were in the playoffs.
Well, from my perspective, Steven, you tell me if I'm out of line here, because again, I was a young kid, and honestly, for people listening to the show and watching the show, depending on where you fall on this, I'm kind of curious where people think, if they want to leave comments or tweet us or whatever. But it's almost like the Patriots were this franchise that couldn't get out of their own way, and they were kind of losers and whatever, and they were doing some things right, but they couldn't put it all together. And I feel like he just gave them like a chip on their shoulder. Like, he walked in the door and was like, no, we're not the same team anymore. You're going to go ahead and talk to us differently. Like, and we're going to go ahead. You might think you're bigger and better than us, but we're going to punch you in the mouth, and we're going to tell you about it. And he kind of brought like a little bit of like again, like to your point, it is similar to Vrabel. It brings like some swagger and some edge to a team that like almost kind of needed a push. And we've talked about Chuck Fairbanks and all the guys and the guys like that before that, and obviously we know what Bill did, but Bill Parcells really deserves to be in the Team Hall of Fame, in my opinion, because he not only gave them credibility, he gave them an edge, and he helped kind of push the friggin' boulder forward as they started kind of dominating teams for the next 2 decades.
Yeah, and I mean, he brought in some really, really good talent while he was here.
Yep.
And some of those guys that he brought in ended up being on, the Super Bowl teams with Bill.
Absolutely.
Teddy Bruschi, Troy Brown. I remember,
Ted Johnson. Yep.
Ted Johnson. I remember when Troy Brown was a rookie, and, I think he was like an 8th or 9th round draft pick, because back then they had more rounds. And, in his first training camp, it was, as you could figure, an 8th round rookie wide receiver, right? But I remember what he said, because one of the media guys asked him about it. And he said, every day I have it in my mind that's it for this kid. I'm going to cut him. And then every day he shows me a reason why he should stick around.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the career Troy Brown had,
Absolutely.
And I remember because, again, he was a really, really good coach. And I remember, I think it was in, I want to say Bledsoe's second year. They get into a shootout with Miami when Marino was there. And I mean, it went back and forth, and, it ended up being something like 38-35. And they just came up short. And they were walking off the team and walking off the field, and Parcells looked at Bledsoe. He had his head down when they were walking off the field. And he said, lift up your head. You got nothing to be ashamed about. And he goes, you were good today. And Bledsoe looked at him and said, not good enough. And then Parcells got a big smile on his face. And he said, that is what I'm looking for. That's the kind of attitude you need. And he said, don't worry, kid. We're going to get there. And I remember that. And because they had him wired for that game. And I remember how he turned everything around. But all of that changed when they went to the Super Bowl. And that's why I've had such a conflict with this ever since then. And it's so many years ago now, right? But, the week of the Super Bowl, he got the Patriots to the Super Bowl. I mean, it was amazing that year. And then they got down there, and come to find out, he spent all week of the Super Bowl, instead of preparing for the game, he was on the phone with the Jets and, already plotting his leaving. And that, to me, I mean, that was when I heard about this and read about it, I was like, oh my God, I was so wrong about this guy, right?
Yep.
And that's why I've always had this conflict, because I loved Parcells.
Yep. I think the thing with him too, or I guess in addition to everything that you said, is the fascinating part of the discussion is the conflict of interest of acknowledging, how good he was as a coach and the qualities he brought to the table, and helping putting the team kind of back on the map and getting them to a certain point. And then also the I don't want to say double cross, seems a little strong, so I don't want to say double cross, but also kind of what you're talking about with with talking to another team, and he's an interesting part of the story. He's almost like a kind of like a current. It's like he's pulling you in a couple different directions, and depending on who you talk to, people feel pretty strongly about him. It's really fascinating to hear about.
I mean,
and again, I was only what, 6-7 years old. Around the time they went to the Super Bowl in '96. I guess I would have been 6, almost about to be 7. So like I remember it, and again, I've researched it enough to know, but for me, it's hard to really feel as strongly, because I'm sure if I was like 26 or 36, I'd feel totally differently than I do now. But I still think he deserves to be in there, and I thought that was a strong statement by Kraft, coming out and kind of letting that, I don't say letting the cat out of the bag, but you know what I mean. So for lack of a better phrase.
Well, and because he had already, talked with Parcells, and Parcells accepted. So Kraft didn't want it to leak out. So he just came forward and said, hey, I want to invite Bill while we're both alive to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, whatever issues they had, and they had some issues when Parcells was here, but they got over that. And
and I was talking to our fearless leader Ian Logue on the phone earlier today, and he mentioned something. He mentioned this. Part of it is some of the same way. It's like it almost felt like it needed to be done. It just felt like it needed to be done before he ends up passing away. It's like you don't want that to happen like posthumously. It's like you want that, you need to make sure that hatchet is buried. Sometimes it's like, okay, you did agree 100% of the time, but you want to let bygones be bygones and move forward.
And that's why I have such heartburn with the selection committee for the Patriots, because they allowed Chuck Fairbanks to die before he was elected.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, see, this was way before your time. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And Chuck Fairbanks, he inherited the worst drafting team in the NFL through the Patriots' entire history up until Fairbanks came along. They drafted terribly. And I remember when I probably was in junior high school, Billy Sullivan, their number one draft pick was a defensive tackle. And they drafted this guy, and he had all the media around him and said, hey, we're going to give this guy a call at his house they called his house, and his dad answered the phone, and he's like, "Yeah, Billy Sullivan, owner of the Patriots. We want to talk to your son. We just drafted him #1." And he goes, "Oh, he's in the hospital because he's had a major knee surgery." And that's what Fairbanks inherited. He brought in some tremendous players.
Yep.
And that was one of his years was the year they set the record that was recently broken by the Ravens for the most rushing yards in one season.
Yep.
That team was a juggernaut. And I remember they made the playoffs and Parcells, Fairbanks last year, and they had a chance to go deep. And Sullivan, I mean, he burned that bridge with him and basically forced him out. And I'll never forget that, because that he had built some really good football teams.
And I mean, everything I've ever heard about Chuck Fairbanks is basically put together a heck of a team. So
and something to keep in mind about Bill Parcells. Parcells has said, after he's been retired, that Chuck Fairbanks was, a good friend of his, and he would rely on Chuck around the time of the draft because, Parcells would give his feelings on certain players, and then he'd ask Fairbanks to give him, honest evaluation of these guys. And he said, Chuck and I, we went through a lot of players, and we spent time doing that. And he always said I'm paraphrasing here, but how much he appreciated that. And the other guy that belongs in Canton, not just in the Patriots Hall of Fame, that passed away before, was Russ Francis.
Right.
Russ Francis was kind of the Gronk 30 years before Gronk.
Yep.
A tremendous football player. And him and Dave Casper, they changed the way the game was played for tight ends. Tight ends became a deep threat.
Yep.
When those two were in the league. Dave Casper played for the Raiders, who threw a lot more. The Patriots were, 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of team, because they had like 5 running backs, And I remember Francis led the team in receiving one year with only 42 catches.
They
didn't throw much in them days.
Yeah, no, it was a different game, but I do think, getting back to Parcells, I do think he belongs in the Team Hall of Fame, because to me, I think Team Hall of Fames, and this is a different conversation for probably a different show, but I think Team Hall of Fames and, major organization Hall of Fames, you can make the argument that they're different, but I always think that whoever's going to be involved in either one should always be part of, if you are going to talk about the history of the game or the history of a team, can you tell the story with or without this player? And if you can, then I think you need to I would always have what they would call a small Hall of Fame. I think that too many. I'm not a big jersey retirement guy. I think the Celtics. I love the Celtics. I love the Bruins, but to me, it's you don't need to retire every jersey. You retire Larry Bird and Bill Russell and Tom Brady and Bobby Orr, but you don't need to retire everybody's number. But at the same time, I do think that being part of these certain Hall of Fames, how can you tell the history of the game and certain things? And I think if you're talking about Parcells, I think, and to your point about Fairbanks, I think if you're talking about the history of the team, you have to talk about them, and they're included. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I'm happy it's finally done. It feels like it's an interesting discussion, and honestly, we've already done 25 minutes. We honestly might have wanted to release that as a separate episode, but I do think it's worth mentioning because it's worth the conversation. And I think that depending on how old you are, or whatever, I think that you'll probably have a stronger feeling than others because, like you said, you were what? You said you were a junior high, and so this was something that was very close to you and something that really mattered, and so you feel probably still emotionally strong about to this day. So.
I am. I mean, I have a blurb of that in every Sunday column that I write.
Yeah.
And but anyway, it is what it is, and I'm happy that they're going to do that.
Yep.
I had some really hurt feelings over that, and I didn't like the way it ended. If he had gone through the Super Bowl and put everything into it, and they still lost, and then he went and did what he needed to do with the Jets, I would have had no problem with that.
Yeah.
But the way it went down, and then he took Curtis Martin with him. So I'm still mad at Bill about that one.
Makes sense. Well, let's move on just for the time purposes. Because I do want to talk about prospects for a bit, and I want to talk about your most recent mock draft. So we're going to try to give it a go. If you could share it, I'd love to see kind of, what your thought was here. Obviously, we can't see which players were taken in advance of each respective position, but just tell me, we don't have to go through that the whole thing. Just tell me, just a quick rundown for time purposes, what your thought process was for each guy.
Yeah. And can you see the,
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, we know the Patriots need a left tackle in the worst way possible. But as this, I was doing the Pro Football Network, using their big board. Yep. And it turns out Travis Hunter was still there at number 4. And, I'm of the opinion that a guy with the potential generational talent that he has, either at wide receiver or cornerback, he was too good to pass up. And, so...
By the way, apparently, according to literally today, they're potentially open to playing at both positions, but they haven't downplayed either one. So,
right. So then, I didn't make any trades in this one. I played it straight. At number 38, Josh Connerly was there, the tackle from Oregon. To me, he's a very good left tackle.
Yep.
He's probably not as good as Will Campbell, but when you're considering you got a generational talent, I think this guy is still day one starter. I think he's
also very young. I forget. I don't have his age in front of me. But he's also very, very young. I want to say he's 21 or just turned 22. Yep. He has my favorite player in the entire draft is Abdul Carter. They played against each other. He didn't allow one single pressure. He's still kind of growing. He has the prototypical frame, has bigger arms, etc. Campbell, I think, still is a tackle. But at the same time, I think he has, there's obviously the conversation about him going to guard, and it's like, well, Connerly to me is still kind of scratching the surface of what he could be at the next level.
Exactly. So to me, at 38, that was a really good pick. I mean, I didn't expect him to be there. And the fact that he was, I really like that. So, that to me was a no-brainer. At 69, I took Harold Fannin, the tight end out of Bowling Green. Now, if you're looking for a Gronk type to be a big blocker, and that, he's not your guy. But, as a receiver, I mean, he caught 117 passes last year for 1,500 plus yards and 10 touchdowns. This guy is exciting in the passing game. And he could be, your typical move tight end who, you match him up on a safety or linebacker. That's a mismatch right there. So, and again, I thought that was really good value. And now you're looking at a passing game where you have all kinds of good weapons in it. So, I went for those three guys, three straight offensive guys, and then it just so happened I went for four straight defensive guys. At 77, TJ Sanders, defensive tackle from South Carolina.
Yep.
And again, we'll talk about this in our prospects, but I'm looking for a guy that's going to, he's a big guy, but he's a penetrator. He's a disruptor. And Sanders, I thought, had a really good year for the Gamecocks, and you can never go wrong with having a South Carolina.
Yeah, I was letting you finish to not step on you, but of course you have to have some from South Carolina in there. So
exactly. How
we'll
can
let
you
that
have
go for now?
Yeah. So yeah, that was a no-brainer. At 106, Tyler Barron, edge guy from Miami. He's another guy. He early in his career, he might be a designated pass rusher and not a 3-down guy, but he has the ability to become that. And he's a good, he's a really good pass rusher. I mean, there was a 3 or 4 game stretch late in the year where he had like 24 pressures. So again, you can't have enough good edge guys, and he could spell some of the guys that they have right now. And at 106, I thought that was pretty good value. 144, it was a guy I really liked. Alabama safety Malachi Moore.
Yeah, we're gonna get into him more next week. I mean, you can still share your thoughts on him, but to me, he's incredibly underrated in this class.
Yes,
I think he's a guy who I think could absolutely make it. I think he's going to be a steal wherever he gets taken, because it seems like he's going to end up going somewhere either late day 2 or more likely early day 3. And I think he's a better player than what his rating is given for whatever reason.
Yeah, and when you watched Alabama play, he was like the quarterback back there.
Yep.
And like you said, we'll get into him more next week.
Yep.
Now we're getting later in the draft. Cody Simon, linebacker from Ohio State. I was really surprised to see him way down there. I always thought he would go earlier, but again, another really good off the ball linebacker. I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, and Luke Lachey was the guy at your next pick that is someone that I mentioned in our last draft when we were talking about tight ends. Yeah. I just like the way Iowa's really developed tight ends from a college to a pro, translation standpoint for the last really more over a decade now. And I think Lachey has all the talent to potentially get there. Maybe he's not going to be an all pro, but I still think he's going to be a good player for you and someone you can get late day 3.
Yeah, and he's a really good blocker. He's more of that inline block. He's got the size, 6'6". I think he's like 250 or 255. He's got good size. He doesn't have that extra, gear.
Burst.
Yeah, but he's a reliable pass catcher, really good blocker, and a 220. Yeah. And then final pick at 238, Xavier Truss from Georgia. Now, I have him listed as a guard, because he played right tackle, and he's a big dude. He's like
he's a monster. He's a monster.
Yeah.
Go ahead and give your analysis on him. While a pulpit stats, he's a big dude.
He's a big dude, and he struggled a little bit with lateral agility against speed rushers. So, like, my feeling is you could play him at tackle, or you kick him inside as a guard, and he'd be a monster guard. You know what I mean? And I think that would help some of that lateral agility issues because he's more on the inside. And I really like that at 238. Again, I was like, oh, yeah, I'll take this guy all day long, because he has the versatility to play at tackle. Maybe with some work, he can overcome some of that stuff. But if you kick him inside the guard, I think he'd be a great fit there.
Yeah, and it seems like that's where he's going. Honestly, I'm pretty much all in favor of taking anybody from Georgia on the offensive line or the defensive front seven. I think that they have proven to translate pretty well. He played 14 games at right tackle last year. But it does seem like guard is going to be his position at the NFL. His official measurements from Indy was 6'7" and 309. I mean, he's a big dude. Yeah. So he's kind of an interesting one. He reminds me a little bit of Zach Tom from Wake Forest from a couple years ago that the Green Bay Packers drafted on day 3. I think he's someone, he'll find a home if he can just get to the right destination. It's just about, man, they just don't build guys like that have that versatility and have that size. Now, no, Zach Tom is significantly smaller than Truss is, but it's about finding that right spot and where he feels comfortable. So, that could be one of those picks where, with left guard for the Patriots, when we have so many questions about, okay, well, is Cole Strange going to be, healthy? Is Layden Robinson going to be there? Is Antonio Mafi, City So, is Jake Andrews, or one of these guys going to be able to, step up? Maybe you plug and play someone like Xavier Truss on day 3. I think it's worth at least taking a crack at that apple.
Oh, yeah. And again, I mean, he's at 238. So if it doesn't work out, it's not like, oh, my God, we had a bust there. You know what I mean? But I think he's definitely worth, him, Luke Lachey, Cody Simon. I think all 3 of those guys, if they were available in those spots, I think those are all good value picks. And
I mean, you're talking about Ohio State linebackers, Iowa tight ends, and Georgia linemen. I mean, let's be honest. At least if you're going to take a swing at something on day 3, you're coming from a pretty good lineage there.
Yes. And like we've said many times, the strength and conditioning coaches at Georgia.
Oh yeah.
Those guys, I don't know what they feed them down there, but that's pretty good stuff.
That's where I think Mike Felger would do a little throat clear, for learning strength at the NFL level. Let's take a quick break, Steve, and then we'll have to go through this defense front seven. But I felt like we covered a lot at the beginning. But look, we'll take a quick break for podcast purposes, and when we get back, we are going to discuss our favorite prospects for the front seven in this year's 2025 NFL Draft. All right, we are back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Derek Haven, Steve Balistrieri. Steve, let's jump right in to this draft class here. Defensive tackle, very deep, kind of a few different guys. Edge players are definitely going to be part of the topic. And one of the biggest names that we have to have a conversation about, and we'll try to be a little quick about this because I don't want to go too long, is Abdul Carter from Penn State.
You want to go edge first?
I feel like it makes sense to go from there. I mean, unless you want to start.
Okay, yeah, else. That's fine. We'll do the edge.
So, I mean, Abdul Carter, I think, is one of the best players in the draft. Really kind of a freakish athlete in the way he's built, the way he moves, the way he bends. He to me is special. And I think that if it was up to me, I would take him. I can understand the argument of going in a different direction for a Patriots standpoint, but if it was up to me, I think I would take him if I had the pick of the litter. What's your take on Carter before we get into anything else?
Well, I think him and Travis Hunter are kind of in the same boat. I think these guys have the capability to be
special
generational players.
Yep.
And I think either one of them is kind of, I hate to say that word because it gets misused a lot, but it can't miss type of prospect.
Yeah, I don't want to say can't miss. I don't want to say can't miss for either of them, but I think it's a weaker class. I think a lot of people have said that. I would agree. I don't think it's like as strong of a class as some, but I think Carter to me seems like has some special traits. And I would think that even if the Patriots have allocated a ton on defense, I still think they need more on offense, and I can hear that, and I can make that argument, and we'll have that discussion next week. I have that, kind of, dog-eared, but to me, Carter can kind of really bend around the corner. You talk about speed to power. You talk about how they can dip under off the tackles. There's not a whole lot of guys that can do that. And those guys can really win you some games. And you've already added on your defense. If you add someone like that into it, man, you could have one of the best pass rushes in the entire league.
Exactly. And again, the old saying, you can never have enough good pass rushers.
Yep.
And that would give you quite a few good ones.
Yep.
I think I talked about Travis Hunter transforming in my post. The offense, I think Carter would do that for the defense, because I think they've already made several really good moves to bolster the defense this year. But then you add a guy like him, and it's just like, the cherry on top.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the Micah Parsons comparisons with him, just given the school, the number.
Mm-hmm.
I think Parsons is kind of a different alien too. I mean, even more than Carter. You go back to Von Miller being drafted, at Texas A&M forever ago, and he had that crazy ability to kind of wrap around the edge. I don't think he's quite at those levels, but I think he's really high up there. And to me, it's like, okay, even if this guy is very good, you're talking about a player you can move around in your defense and be a chess piece for the next 10 years at one of the what I would classify as the top 4 premium position. Argue about the rankings at a different time: defensive end, corner, receiver, quarterback. Like, those are the 4 the top big 4. This guy can be that guy. And in a draft where a lot of guys might be rated similar, if you get the chance of this guy, I just have a hard time passing on him, because I think that you could add him to Harold Landry, to Milton Williams, to Christian Barmore, to Keon White. And then all of a sudden, man, that defense, we'll have to worry about the offense. We know we have to protect Drake May. We know we need guys for him to throw to. But, man, defensively, if you're getting after the passer, I mean, you're not going to go broke taking a profit. He's one of those guys that's going to pick up a couple nickels for you.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, sometimes, I mean, you have a plan going in, but if a guy with that kind of talent falls in your lap, you can't pass him up to draft for need.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know they need a left tackle, and and the scenario that I did, with my mock draft yesterday.
Yep.
Travis Hunter pops up, and you can't justify passing up a generational guy like that. I mean, with your 4th pick in the draft, you just can't do it.
It would be a tough pill to swallow. It really would be, to pass on somebody like that. I just find it so hard. Like, as much as, if you want to tell me that you think Will Campbell is going to be a Hall of Fame left tackle, okay, I believe you. But if you have any doubt at all about the arm length, about the size, I don't think you have that quite issue here. Some people are worried about the stress factor, in the lower leg, foot area. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You could feel that way, but he still moves differently than most people on the planet move, and he's at a premium position. I just have a hard time just passing on somebody like that. It's hard to do.
No.
So let's keep moving though. Just to stay on time. If you were talking about someone maybe let's say that Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter both go. I would say that there's a couple of guys in that position that we're talking about next. And I would put Michigan's Mason Graham as one of those guys. Now, I know we're talking about edge guys, but because we're just talking about the top of the draft, I want to include Graham in this. To me, Mason Graham needs to be in that conversation. I think that there's no doubt in my mind Mason Graham is going to be a good player in the NFL, assuming he gets to the right team. My only thing with that is, by all accounts, knock on wood, it seems like Christian Barmore is going to be healthy, and they just spent a ton of money on Milton Williams. So can you really spend the 4th overall pick on somebody like that? I feel like you cannot do that to a position like that. If you're talking about an edge rusher, you might be able to convince me, but for an interior lineman, man, that's a hard pill to swallow. And I think that, but I do think he's a really, really good player. I think he's consistent, and I think that he'll find a home somewhere and be a good player for the next 10 years.
Yeah, and my feelings on him were, if there's still doubt about Christian Barmore and, Hunter and Carter are gone, I think Graham would make a ton of sense, right? Mm-hmm. Because now you'd have 2 really good, interior guys that can penetrate. But, that's a bridge that they might not have to cross because, with Vrabel's comments the other day, it seems like, that Barmore is going to be there, right when off-season workouts start, which is tremendous for him and for the team. So,
yep. No, I'm with you on that front. Sticking with the edge for now. Man, there's Tennessee's James Stewart. James Pierce. There's Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. A couple of guys that I think we would both like. It's kind of in a weird spot for the Patriots, just from a time standpoint. I think it's a weird spot for the Patriots because I don't think either one of those guys is getting into the second round, and they're not going to be taken as high as 4. You know what I mean? So that to me, I feel like is a little different. You talk about Mike Green from Marshall, really interesting player.
Yep.
But at the same time, he has 2. I forget if it's 2 or 3. Forgive me if it's 2 or 3 different kind of off the field issues that are very much impending on what his pro career is going to be like. So he's kind of an interesting guy. But is there anyone in the first round? I guess from an edge perspective, anyone from the first round that if you traded back from a Patriot standpoint that you think that would be in play?
Yeah, I mean, the guys you mentioned, Shamar Stewart, Pierce, Mike Green, I think those are all really good names. Another guy I like is another Georgia guy, Michael Williams.
Yeah. Him, Jalen Walker. I mean, and we'll get to Walker when we get to linebackers. These guys, they just find them in labs. I mean, they just grow these guys. I don't. It doesn't make any sense. But they have their flaws. But both guys are so intriguing for how they're built and what they could potentially be if everything kind of clicks in.
Yeah. Now, a couple of the edge guys I like in the middle rounds was one of the guys that we mentioned, Tyler Boyd from Miami.
Yep.
And Donovan, and I know I'm gonna butcher this poor guy's last name. Ezekiraku, I think is how they say it, from Boston College.
Yeah, and we talked about that earlier today. So a little smaller. They have him at 6'2", 248. A little smaller, but man, he could fly, pretty long arms. And honestly, I was when you and I talked about him, I was up in the middle of the night, so I haven't been feeling good the last couple of days. And so I was like falling asleep early, and I was like up for like 2 hours, and I was kind of just like flipping around a couple of different prospects and watching them and reading on them. And I'm sitting there being like, man, Boston College has had a couple of pretty good guys on there. Oh, Mike Vrabel and Bill O'Brien have a pretty good relationship. We don't need to have the 6'4", 250, 260-pound guys like the elephant position that Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick had. Oh, well, maybe this guy and from Boston College could be that guy that's probably going to go in round 2 or 3. Maybe this guy is someone who could be right up Mike Vrabel's alley, because he reminds me a little bit of Harold Landry, who, oh, by the way, came from the exact same program. So I think he is. I kind of have starred him with an asterisk and highlighted his name because I think he's absolutely on the table.
Yes, and I just missed out on him in the mock draft that I did. He was like coming up, and I was like, "Oh, he's going to be there. He's going to be there." No, he's not.
my biggest thing with the Patriots is, I assume if they go Carter, I think it's gonna, not to be a spoiler alert here, but if they go Carter, Hunter, or Campbell, they'll probably try to take a tackle at 38 or trade up slightly for it. And if they don't, then that's when you have to start looking at those defensive ends and tight ends and running backs in that 3, 4, 5 range. And that's when we've had conversations about. That's the way I'm seeing it in my mind. So I just wonder if he's going to be able to get to that spot, because I have a hard time seeing he's going to get there.
Yeah, I mean that's the that's the thing. You don't know how the board's going to play out. I mean, he might go even earlier than that.
Sure.
So, but that's the beauty of the draft. Is you never know. There's always going to be some guys that are really far risers, and there's going to be guys that, they always say the same thing every year. Man, I can't believe this guy's fallen. So,
well, it's funny. The closer you get to the draft, the more it's, there's 42 first-round picks. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there's only 32 teams, so somebody's going to have to fall out, and then you start seeing guys fly up the board, and there's kind of different things. So you know how that goes. We've been over that for long enough. Defensive tackle is kind of interesting because I know I know we I think as a Patriots, from a Patriots standpoint, have two pretty dang good players when healthy on the interior. But I still think that there's some potential to kind of beef it up from a rotational standpoint and kind of rotate these guys. I don't think that's obviously a factor in the first round. So is there anyone from day 2 or day 3 that kind of jumps off the board for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure where these guys will end up, but the guy we talked about, TJ Sanders from South Carolina.
Yep.
I think he's
shameless plug by you. Just unbelievably shameless plug picking.
But he was on my list, so
he's a good player, so I'm letting it slide. But shameless plug for you.
Kenneth Grant from Michigan.
Yep.
Another good one.
I really like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss.
Yes, he's on my list too.
Yeah, he's someone who I think is almost tailor-made to be put on this team simply because of two things. He has all the raw tools, and he's not going to be going high enough where it's going to impact some of the other maybe higher positional needs the Patriots guy get. Mm-hmm. And I think it's someone that Mike Vrabel would love to work with because he has all these physical abilities. So if they can get his hands on this guy, well, man, I mean, we're talking about Christian Barmore coming off the heels of blood clots and his own health, and not to mention the fact that he's going to have to get back into football shape. And Milton Williams is going to have to go ahead and start playing, from 48% of the snaps to 75% of the snaps. Well, they're going to need another guy in there to go ahead and rotate.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like if you bring in someone like this, if you can kind of get their feet wet and kind of rotate them in, well, really now you're starting to talk about a good kind of rotation. I think it would make all the sense in the world to take a defensive tackle in rounds 3 or 4 when the class is this deep, and then you have a guy like someone like this. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and again, the defensive tackles that I put on my list were guys that that fit that attacking downhill penetrating style, right?
Yep.
And another guy, again, mid rounds, Alfred Collins from Texas.
Yep.
Another good one.
Yep. He's also on my list as well.
Yeah. Now, one guy I'm kind of on the fence with, Ryle Mills from Notre Dame.
Okay.
I'm not sure he fits that that Vrabel type, but I mean he's a really good football player, So those were a couple of the guys that I had.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on all those. So I think they're good names to kind of think about. I don't think it's a heavy position in need, but I think given the fact that they have 2 new guys on the team, one of which again is increasing his snaps by quite a big margin, and the other guy coming off a pretty serious health issue. I think it's worth kind of just keeping that in the back of our heads there. From a linebacker standpoint, man, we've talked about this for a bit. In Vrabel's defense, that different kind of differentiates itself from Bill's. You have your defensive linemen more vertical, more penetrating. Your linebackers, they want a little bit more speed. They already made the move with Juwan Bentley. They added Robert Spillane. They added Jack Gibbons. The Christian Ellis deal that we talked about on the last show. A lot of guys there that they seem to have filled, but I still think that maybe in the middle to late rounds, they could add a couple guys. Obviously you mentioned one earlier in your mock. Is there anyone else that kind of jumps off the page?
Yeah, the kid from Oregon, Jeffrey Bassa.
Yeah, he is to me. He is to
That's
me
a
another
Vrabel
Vrabel
type
guy.
player.
That's a Vrabel guy.
Yeah, that's a Vrabel guy. Yep. And of course, at the top of the draft, which we know, they probably won't go for, but you mentioned him earlier, Jalen Walker. Georgia, Jihad Campbell from Alabama.
Also love him. Yep.
Oh man, those guys are really good. But
Jalen Walker,
will they take those guys? I don't see it happening because I think those guys are first rounders.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean Jalen Walker and Campbell are going to go top 20, 25 at worst. I would, if I had to bet on it, I would say I think Campbell's going to be the best player. He, to me, reminds me a little bit. They're different style of players, but I feel the same way about him that I felt about Donta Hightower watching the Alabama. I was like, man, this guy he just kind of gets it. It's just about where do you have that need? And I just, the Patriots aren't going to trade up for him, and he's not going to be there in the second round, and they're not going to take him at 4. So he's kind of off the table. Jalen Walker, I think, is fascinating. He reminds me of former Georgia Bulldog Trayvon Walker. Very different, again, different players, but kind of like physical freaks. Like there's just not a whole lot of guys that are that big, that sturdy, have that arm length, have that explosiveness, that speed, and that raw ability. You're just not going to find that everywhere. So it's just like, where is someone going to take the the gamble on him? And also, I think he definitely is more of a projection. I think that's definitely a factor. And then I would also go to Bassa again, to just go back to you. I would say that, to me, if the Patriots are on day 2 and they're looking at a guy, he's someone who has the agility and kind of the leadership, and also I would say has the he has basically a very complementary set of skills to someone like Robert Spillane. If you're going to talk about Robert Spillane being someone who's going to be able to tackle everybody in space and kind of crush the run game, well, maybe you want a Bassa to go ahead and run sideline to sideline and go ahead and coverage people, cover guys. I think that, to me, is certainly not something to be overlooked.
Now, and one of the other things I wanted to mention to you, and I know we talked about it last week, I wonder, with this move to faster, more athletic guys, do they move Mate Mapu back to the linebackers, where I thought he should have been all along?
I think that's actually a more complex question than we really have time for today, but it's something that I think it will. I'll go back to the famous line that Fred Kirsch always, has always said, and I know Bill Belichick is gone and Mike Vrabel's here now, but Fred Kirsch from Patriots.com always says, don't listen to what they say, look what they do. It's hard because I think it would make a lot of sense to put Mapu in that linebacker room. But to me, I also wonder, are some of these guys long for this team, just given kind of wanting how they want to turn things over? And I would say the same thing, by the way, against Mapu I would say the same thing for we already talked about Bentley, but I would definitely put Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar in that conversation too. Like where do they fit in? And we're gonna have a whole different conversation about safeties next week because I think that free safety is. I know there's a lot of. It's funny because the team has a lot of big needs, and I know receiver's one of them. I know tight end is a sneaky one. I know left tackle obviously is there. I'm sorry, but free safety is one of those needs that they haven't quite had since Devin McCourty walked away. And there's going to be a kid from Texas in the second or third round that makes a ton of sense, and we'll get to that. but to me, I think that there are other issues that people are, and I'm not, I don't want to generalize anybody's thoughts or whatever. I'm not saying that some of these things aren't issues, but to me, I just wonder if they're not trying to just shake things up a bit more, because I still think there's more changes to come. And you and I have been on pretty strongly that we're going to have some pretty high roster turnover, and all indications are we're looking like we're proven right. And I'm not so convinced that it's not going to be even more as we go into year 2, as he goes ahead and flips this roster over, because again, it's not a 1-year fix. So,
right. And think about it. I mean, they've already signed 15 guys?
I think 14 or 15. Yeah.
Yeah. And that weren't on the team last year. I know they re-signed, a couple of their own guys, but they've already brought in 15 guys. Now you have 9 draft picks.
And how many captains
I'm not
are
saying every one of them is going to stick, okay? But, just on paper, you're bringing in 24 new guys, and that doesn't even, undrafted free agents or other guys who have been released or they make a trade for. That's already a high number,
And it's not only that, but it's also different guys and different schemes, different coaches, different perspectives. And then we also know about the second wave of free agency, which is absolutely a thing. I know it's not as strong as the first one is, but once this draft comes and goes, there's going to be another decent little signing period there. Some of these receivers, Tyler Lockett, Amari Cooper, just to use one position and 2 veterans off the top of my head as an example. Those guys aren't necessarily in a rush, to hurry. They'll find teams, but like they're not going to probably sign right now. But if X team needs a receiver and they don't get one in the first 2 rounds like they want, and they get one in the 3rd or 4th that they don't feel like can contribute in year 1, well, enter in one of these guys, and these guys, so and that's again just 2 guys off the top of my head in one position, if you're talking about 22 positions, I mean, I don't know what the Patriots want at the safety position. We all talked about the Patriots and Bill wanting these big nickel safeties that can move all around, and yeah, he loved Devin McCourty. But he also loved Jabril. He also wanted Kyle Duggar, who we drafted in the first pick of that draft. But I would, at this point, if I had to bet on it, one of those guys is off the team. So who's taking up those snaps? And are we talking about different guys? That to me, I think is still to be determined. I think that so many people look to kind of rush to see through the kaleidoscope and look for like this answer that it's too early. There's not enough pieces in the puzzle to go ahead and have the answer that some people are looking for, and I think that that's still to be determined.
I think that that's a possibility, which
Yep.
is they don't have. Well, they brought in Marcus Epps, who's a free safety, but
True, but he's also coming off a pretty big injury, which is why they kind of guaranteed it. But they gave him some more money, and it seems like they really like him, and so
right.
How does he play into that?
But if you draft a free safety, now you have a younger guy in the building that's going to be a free safety, because most of the guys they have, I think, are better suited down in the box,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, not that they're not good players. It's just that's not their bailiwick. You know what I mean? So
my one thing though, with just while we're on the topic of it, and then we could save this for
next week
later. Yeah, but Kyle Duggar had some really good ball skills back in college, and if you're penetrating pretty vertically, like Vrabel's defenses like to do, like Terrell Williams likes to do, penetrate, blitz, do that. Linebackers play side to side. Maybe you have some guys at strong safety play more in the box. Well, maybe Duggar can go ahead and go back there, and maybe he does. Maybe it turns into more picks. Or do you have a surplus of guys that can't do what Mike Vrabel had with Kevin Byard in Tennessee, and now you have to go ahead and replace him, and that's, the kind of question that we're in,
Exactly.
So, anyone else that we didn't mention?
I think we covered it all.
Yeah. No, I would say that overall, really talented edge class. We didn't go as in depth on some of the, I would say, first top 50, 60 guys, because I think that it's going to be really difficult if the Patriots do go Abdul Carter, if they're going to be able to double dip. I would be shocked by that. I just don't see that from a positional standpoint as it applies to them. But I do think defensive tackle absolutely is in the cream of the crop. The good news that we've heard from the owners' meetings and everything from today, again, we're recording this on April 1st. I would say that if Christian Barmore if he's trending upwards, I think that's huge news for the team on so many different fronts, because I think that the combination of him and Milton Williams, it would be so fun to talk about in a couple of weeks. And we will spend more time than anyone listening to this show wants to hear about it. But I do think that linebacker is really interesting. And we'll go ahead and recap a couple of guys that we probably left off. But Steve, any final thoughts?
Well, I just, I think the front seven is always my favorite position to watch.
Yep.
Those type of players. I just that's just been ever since the days of Nick Wanakani. So when he was a Patriot, but I love seeing those guys, and there's plenty of good ones out there. For the draft this year. So I'm excited to see what comes of that. And congratulations to Bill Parcells.
Yep.
I guarantee you the speeches that bring him in are going to be worth it.
Oh, I'm sure it's going to be definitely something we want to replay a couple of times. I'm sure it'll be fun. I'll say this, I going through the defensive front seven of this class, even though I obviously Abdul Carter at the forefront of it because of where the Patriots are picking is obviously a big topic of conversation, and given the moves that they've made, I'm not sure it's going to be a huge targeted group by the team. But I will say this, it does kind of encapsulate this draft pretty well. Maybe it's not the most talented draft of all time. Maybe it's not, you don't have the lock ballot Hall of Famers in the top 10, but you have a lot of really good players that you can get. And I still think you get I think you can get a starting defensive tackle or a starting defensive end or a starting linebacker on day 2 and even early day 3. And so I think that this group is a talented one, even if it's not super top heavy, if that makes sense. And I think that, again, kind of speaks to this draft as a whole. So,
yeah. Well,
all right.
That's great.
Well, we will come back next week with not only our regular weekly show of just touching base on all the updated Patriots news, because of course, never slow day for Patriots fans. Also, we're going to get into the secondary next week. I was watching a bunch of guys last night. I'm super excited to talk about. I definitely think that show will be 100% worth your attention. Thank you for everyone who tuned into this episode of Patriots 4th and 2. And we will talk to you guys then.